One of our worries is that the intrigues between because it appears that now DPP and DCI are not reading on the same page in this matter. They are fighting each other openly in court.
Who is in charge here? Is it the DPP or the DCI?
The court.
The only person who has the power and the mandate to bring charges before a court of law is the DPP. The DCI do their investigations, present the files before the DPP, and then wait for the DPP to either give approval or recommendations regarding the charges. What we have seen today, and indeed began yesterday, was a case where the DCI jumped the gun.
The camaraderie between the offices of the Director of Public Prosecution and that of the Directorate of Criminal Investigations appears to be on the rocks. The stage was set. The man in the docks, Kenya Ports Authority Managing Director Daniel Manduku. Why, you ask? The possible loss of over 2.9 billion shillings at the Kenya Ports Authority in fraudulent tender awards. After roughly 6 months of investigations, the DCI detectives arrested, questioned, and subsequently arraigned the embattled MD in court. That's where the gloves came off. How, you ask? The accused were free to walk away after the investigating officer produced a charge sheet authorized by the DCI, but which was disowned by the DPP's office. Apparently, the DPP had directed that the accused should be freed on a police bond. So there was a clear clash of roles by both offices on how to handle the matter. When did the two agencies start reading from different scripts? And with this case bringing out their differences to the limelight, how is the common agenda to successfully convict a big fish case, or any case for that matter, affected? That's the big story tonight. Good evening. Many thanks for joining us. My name is Jesse Rogers. Allow me to appreciate our guest who's already in studio, Professor Wajakoya. Thank you so much for making time, and we truly will get deeper and pick your mind on this particular matter and the role of these two agencies in combating graft and other cases as well. So let's get right into it. Our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, earlier on had a conversation with Philip Murgor, who also happens to be a lawyer advocate, but previously served as the DPP. Would be interesting to get his take on how these two agencies are functioning now henceforth. Over to you, Sophia.
Hello, Jesse. So yesterday, Kenyans perhaps got an incline, a glimpse into some of what appears to be frosty relations now between two crucial offices in the criminal justice system. That's the Director of Criminal Investigations and the Director of Public Prosecutions. In a matter that was before court, differences between the officers representing the two offices, with one ready to go ahead with the charges against the KPA boss. However, the prosecutor from ODPP wasn't ready, saying this is still a matter that was under consideration, and ordinarily ODPP is the one that, when a matter is brought before him, a file that is after investigations by the police, then will either accept, that is, give the go-ahead for the DCI, and of course the prosecutors from his office then take lead, or he would reject it if at all there are issues around the file, or perhaps amend, is what we have known to be the modus operandi so far. But that playing out in public, and some of the lawyers saying, lawyers for the accused, arguing that in fact these issues between these two officers have been going on for a long time, and now their clients are being used as scapegoats, or rather their rights have been affected in as far as these issues then tampering when charges are brought before court, before there is agreement and consensus on the way forward. So to understand more about just how do these offices work, how should they work, how does the law envisage that they cooperate and work together, we remember the two officers are seen to largely have been an injection to the criminal justice system by President Kenyatta in as far as reinvigorating, quote unquote, the war against corruption, which he argues is a legacy agenda point for him. So I have with me Philip Murgor, who once served as Kenya's DPP. Thank you for making time for us this evening. I'll begin with asking what you make of that. Two officers from different offices, DCI or DPP, differing before a judge, suspects in court, and one saying we are ready to go, another saying we are not.
Firstly, Sophia, I have no hesitation in saying that Mr. Kinoti was completely out of order. One would even say he's guilty of abuse of office. Why? It is not his role to prefer charges. Under the new constitution, and even under the old constitution, it was the Attorney General. Under the new constitution, it is solely the responsibility of the DPP. What Kinoti was trying to do was force the hand of the DPP to prefer a charge. That in itself is abuse of office.
Yeah.
Under the new constitution, it is the mandate of the DPP. Files are forwarded to him. He considers the evidence and decides in his sole discretion whether or not he shall prefer a charge. So that's really what the law is today.
And so what we heard from the officer from DCI is that they had followed due process, they had prepared their charge sheet, they'd investigated. What does this speak to, though? So on the face of it is what we saw play out in court, but what does it speak to in as far as what could be going on behind the scenes?
Sophia, they don't prepare the charge. It's not their job to prepare the charge. And that's the problem. Kinoti did not go to law school. He did not study criminology. He read sociology. So it is a problem of understanding. He doesn't understand that his role is to investigate and pass the file on to the DPP. Now, we understand from what we read in the papers that Kinoti decided the file had taken too long. So he took it upon himself to arrest somebody, take him to court with a draft charge sheet and try and force the DPP to sign. That is an abuse of process. That is to breach the constitution, and it is Kinoti who is totally out of order. What could have gone on? Well, unless Kinoti has an interest in the matter, why should he worry about whether or not a file takes a day, a month, 2 months? That's not his job.
The converse of that could be argued that perhaps, allegedly, some would argue that DPP has an interest in the matter, and that is why he's stalling, and that this is to ensure things are moving. So can we cast aspersions on either anyway at this point?
As of now, there is no reason to cast aspersions on the DPP. I was a DPP. A file can sit on one's table for days, weeks, months, without any bad faith being imputed. And if there's any bad faith being imputed, then it's up to Kinoti to investigate the DPP and see whether or not the DPP has an interest. But I've heard that argument. It is completely without merit. The DCI was totally out of order. In fact, he made a laughing stock of the process of the criminal justice system, and you found for the first time even lawyers who are practicing criminal law siding with the DPP, not because they know the facts, but they know the law.
What is the danger of this kind of a situation in your view, so that you have these two officers and officers who in the past in the institutions have worked rather well? We've seen them together. In fact, it was at some point understood that EACC was feeling left out in this new era where you have these new officers in town. But now that we have this happening, the officers concerned have denied the same, saying everything is okay. But what would we be risking in the war against corruption?
Let me move and make a comparison. In the Sarah Wairimu Cohen case, the same thing happened. Without a shred of evidence, two investigating officers forced an officer in the ODPP to sign a charge sheet of murder against Sarah Wairimu Cohen. To this day, no evidence has been provided. The Constitution creates a situation where the DPP only prefers a charge once he is satisfied.
But hold on,
now,
to challenge you on that, you say forced. Yesterday we didn't see anyone being forced, so this officer you claim was forced. I
appreciate what you're saying. In the case of Wairimu Cohen, the DPP, Nurin Haji, was in Brazil, and he had left an officer called Manduku on duty, and he was prevailed upon to sign a charge sheet on the understanding that evidence would follow. There was no evidence on that day. Now, clearly, the DPP or the ODPP have now created a situation where they do not do those kind of things. They only prefer charges when they are satisfied that a case will go forward to the conclusion. So what Kinoti appears to have done, because he got impatient, he decided to try and embarrass the ODPP into preferring a charge on his terms. That is completely out of order.
Yeah.
I have had DCIs like this work with me when I was DPP. And I remember in the case of Joseph Kamau, he was very similar to Mr. Kinoti in his approach to things. And you had to hold him on a leash. You had to direct him to shut up and stop playing to the public gallery. But that's the job of a DPP. Mm-hmm. And what is now happening is that the bromance has ended, and now each must be told to stick to their respective lanes. Mm-hmm. The lane of Kinoti is to investigate, period. Talk less, no romance with the media, no giving select tidbits to select media on his investigations. Forward files to the DPP in his sweet time, and when I say sweet time, time must be reasonable, consider a matter and determine whether or not it should go forward to court.
Yeah.
So that's really where they should be. Each should stick to their lanes.
And doesn't this for you bring in concerns around perception, that the weaponization that we've had about the war on corruption, that this ideally is the kind of situation that would strive in when you have the two offices reading from different scripts?
There have been allegations about the weaponization of the war against corruption. The jury is still out, except that I must say, in many of these cases where the DCI has been involved in high drama and exclusive leakages, it has all turned out to be an anticlimax, because when the cases go to court, they stall. The DPP is then forced to ask for time to prepare the case. So I don't want to form a conclusion on that. I have held the view.
Perhaps a perception of interference, and that those fears about it being weaponized could be real, not because we're confirming, but because it's a perception that's quickly forming.
You know, Sophie, you're tempting me to give you the same example. I have experienced Kinoti weaponizing the role that he plays. I have seen him very recently make false allegations against me and my wife, who is a judge of the Court of Appeal, in order to silence me. That is to weaponize his role in so far as he's an investigator. As for the idea that prosecutions are also weaponized, I have heard the argument. I'm involved in one large case. I'm yet to see evidence of that. All that I can say is it is the Constitution that decides who does what. Mm-hmm. And for the DPP to avoid a situation where he's accused of having made decisions that effectively amount to weaponizing the fight against corruption, it is the DPP who must now stand up, stand tall, and abide by the Constitution. Yeah. So all I can say is the perception must be avoided, but we're creeping into an arena where that perception is gaining currency. Mm.
What becomes the recourse, in your view, of a DCI who, after investigating, as we've heard in this particular instance, feels that a matter is taking rather too long and wants to move on it? You talked about investigating, but still, even after that, would that mean still taking the same investigations back to the same office that one alleges or feels is not moving as fast? So is there a recourse outside of the other interested party?
Under the Constitution, the DPP can be removed for misconduct. If the DCI feels that the DPP has developed an interest in a case and will not prosecute it for personal reasons, he can report it, and a tribunal can be formed to determine whether or not the DPP is fit to remain in that office. Mm-hmm. And by the same token, if you get a rogue DCI, and we are getting signs of that, who believes that he owns investigations and he owns cases and he owns prosecutions, then there is also recourse. He can also be removed from the position of DCI. Mm-hmm. The public interest must prevail. Crime, suspected crime, corruption, suspected corruption must be investigated, but in a manner that serves the public good, not feeds on the egos of individuals and their personal aggrandizement. Yes.
In your view, what does this portend for the war against corruption? It's one that, in terms of rhetoric, we have had a whole load about, and everyone, the DPP talked about going after the big sharks and not the whales. In fact, not even the shark, but whales. And we've seen a lot of activity around arrest. There used to be the Kamata Fridays and all of that. But what does this situation, I wonder first if you're surprised this is happening at this point, but as you respond to that finally, what does this portend?
You remind me of my short stint as a public prosecutor, and many have now asked me whether I had foreseen this. In my short time there, I could see an element of disconnect. I could see that the DCI in particular was involved in the perception of fighting corruption. High drama. Kamata Friday is just drama. There is no need to arrest anyone on Friday and lock them up until the end of the weekend. What we need is effective investigations, thorough investigations, effective prosecutions and convictions ultimately. What does it mean now? The president has to examine the state of the game. The state of play today is that it's going nowhere. He needs to decide what to do. In my view, he needs to make changes. It's not working. After 2 years, the Transparency International the other day gave a report card on Kenya. We aren't doing better at all in the fight against corruption. It's time to look and see who has failed and whether or not it can be reorganized.
Does he have that wiggle room for changes, security of tenure?
He does. No one is indispensable. The DPP can be removed, but following a longer process. The DCI can be removed as early as yesterday. And so it's up to him.
Okay. Thank you very much for making time for us. Philip Murgo with us this evening, Wakili, and of course saying that at the end of the day, is it a surprise that we are here? Not quite, but going forward, it will be interesting to see if in fact what he speaks of, the president perhaps weighing in, is something we'll see. It's unlikely that would be public if in fact he did weigh in, but the fact that this is happening at this point, when the hope of the country, that the thorn that has continued to be in the flesh of Kenya would be dealt with once and for all, is really disheartening. And so going forward, again, to the point I made earlier, the two officers speaking to them earlier, seeking comment on this issue, they say all is well. But is it, Jesse?
May I have one more?
One more.
All right, that's a good point to end it. Thank you so much, Sophia Wenuna. Definitely, all doesn't seem to be well, despite them saying that. So I'll just get right into it and get the quick reactions of our guests. Allow me to introduce Okion Omtata. Thank you so much for making time. We appreciate your contribution. All right, Wajakoya, allow me to start with you. We've just heard what Philip Murgo had to say. Your quick reaction on that.
Philip Murgo is a DPP. During his tenure, we saw the worst regime in the Director of Public Prosecutions. There's a lot of corruption, and he has no moral authority to speak on his case, to speak on a case he's handling in court, and blame the DCI on a matter in which he has an interest. He's settling scores, and he knows the rules. And if this is the kind of human beings that we had holding those kind of positions, I beg to differ. I respect him. He's senior counsel, but today he's messed up himself by making into the matter he's involved, dragging in the DCI when recently the DCI and the DPP were absolved of the misconduct that he had alleged. He has totally gone it nuts, and I'm sorry to say this on live television. Secondly, as a Kenyan, the issue is being blown out of proportion. Because if the two officers today said, one from the DPP and one from the DCI, say that it was kind of misunderstanding, yes, let us actually find out so that we can harmonize. But when you blow things out of proportion, then that means we have now gotten out. How do you refer to a person like the office of the DCI as a rogue, DCIs and what have you? This is a language which is very disparaging. This is coming from a bitter man who wants to win his case, and he wants to use this to settle scores. That is wrong. Secondly, I am very much disheartened that things are playing out in the media. But as far as I'm concerned, the DPP and the DCI are very intact. If there's any difference, then I ought to have known. These are people who are fighting for corruption in this country. They are together, in my opinion, and I think this problem will be resolved very soon.
Okay, Umtata, are we blowing this out of proportion? What's your take on what we saw?
Well, I don't know what we saw.
Yeah.
I saw what the media saw. I did not see what really happened. I saw what was reported.
Okay.
And there's a possibility that was sensationalized and thrown out of proportion because it looks like there was a small irregularity. And a small irregularity that will be addressed and dealt with. But in terms of the structures, I think there are structural problems that both the DPP and the DCI face. First of all, I've got an issue with staffing. They are heavily understaffed, and the staff they have are heavily unqualified. And so there's need to have some specialization, some specialized workforce, because I do meet some of those lawyers in court. The DPP's lawyers are just the average law school graduate who has gotten applied for a job, and there has been no training beyond what they learned in law school in terms of fighting crime, not even through apprenticeship. So you have got capacity. When you go to the DCI, he faced a similar problem. There was a time I had a problem one time, and I went to the CID, and I reported it, and the way it was being handled was so haphazard, only for me to learn later on that the guy who had been assigned to my case was an AP officer seconded to the CID. Now you can see that kind of structural problems. So there are major structural problems, and I think one of the things we need to really address in terms of the DCI as a crime-fighting entity, and not a policing entity. We must distinguish between the DCI and the police. Okay. We need to delink them. We need to make the DCI autonomous of the police and staff them so that they can be able to do investigations without being tied down to policing, you see. So, and that's one of the major handicaps that the DCI has, is that he's part of the police. And if you look at the mandate of the police, it's not very clear in terms of fighting crime, detecting crime, and doing those kind of things. So we need to begin setting up institutions, maybe along the identity of the FBI things and stuff like that, whereby there are really crime busters, and they equip them with the modern tools that they need to do their work, forensics and stuff like that. When you come to the issue of criminal, this is what you call economic crimes. That's usually very heavily specialized areas. These people need a lot of manpower, a lot of capacity, a lot of good pay. Because one of the things that kills the cases is that you'll find somebody who is struggling even to pay his house rent of 10,000 shillings, being assigned to investigate a case of billions of shillings. So you wonder, I would expect that the higher the amount, the bigger the amount, the higher the rank that would handle it. So that there's also some name to go with it. But you'll find that it's basically the just the constable who does the investigating officer, always the junior police officer there. Yeah. So there's a lot of that issue, and I think we should look at the structural problem. But in terms of what happened in this Mombasa case, first of all, this particular case of Dr. Manduku runs very deep. How did Dr. Manduku become the managing director of Kenya Ports Authority? Have you known that drama that went around? How he was removed from here, how the other guy, the lady who was in there, was kicked out. She was effectively fighting corruption. She had controlled things, she had whatever. They sabotaged her by blocking containers and doing all those things, and they created a hype and they threw her out, headed by the current minister for transport. They brought in Dr. Manduku as a part of a cartel. So how deep those things go, I don't know. But when I saw what happened, I was not surprised. There's a possibility that somewhere, somehow, the systems got compromised, because if they could get out, I think it was called Agnes, who was in charge. So those cartels are there. And so when you fight corruption, I think we should not look at them as an episode. I would have liked whoever did the story to have backgrounded it and gone back and inquired how did Dr. Manduku become the managing director of KPA, and look at the corruption that led to his becoming the director of KPA. Then you'll understand that to touch him is very difficult.
All right. Professor, he just brought up the issue of compromising, especially when we're looking at economic crimes. I think this is a big issue. When we have two agencies that are supposed to work hand in hand in the fight against corruption, I mean, to supplement what President Uhuru Kenyatta is actually envisaging, what does this speak in the, the big picture in the fight against corruption?
I think I would first of all want to concur in tautology with what my friend Okia has said. If we look at the whole thing and look at it behind the windows or the shelves or the curtains, something is not right. Because if you look at, like on August 29th, 2019, Kinoti wrote to the CS citing frustrations by the KP officials. That means Kinoti must have been frustrated all along when he was investigating, and probably, who knows? But then, on the other hand, if you look at Haji, Haji is not somebody who takes bribes. It's like Kinoti. Haji is a no-nonsense prosecutor. He's somebody who delivers. I know him personally. So, might it have been some of the officers behind the veil, on both sides, working in cahoot with corrupt officials, so that the two big boys, Kinoti and Haji, had their hands sealed? We don't know. So we need some kind of inquiry. Instead of coming up and blaming Kinoti and blaming Haji and then playing to the media with the lawyers who have already earned millions of shillings from their client, now playing it in court, somebody also have to look into it. When matters come to be sensationalized by the media at the expense of the freedom of somebody who has frustrated the establishment, we have to look into that.
Okay.
This is corruption at the highest behead. Because if now somebody can come up and blame Haji holistically and blame Kinoti holistically, does it mean that the good that they have been doing before now can be shelved the way the former DPP is saying that rogue DCIs should be thrown out?
Okay.
Hell no. I'm defending Kinoti and I'm defending Haji.
Okay.
Something ought to be done. Go ahead.
No, continue.
Yes, something ought to be done to resolve this matter once and for all, for us to continue on the war against corruption. Because when these frictions come in and the enemy takes advantage, that means they have found out now what to do. Let us fight them to the head. Let us divide them so that we can spur corruption. And that's what I'm seeing. That's how I'm looking at it.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Let's take a short break right now on the big story. When we come back, we delve deeper. Of course, we've mentioned about what happened. Yes, they played to the media, but is there a deep, issue lying between these two offices that are supposed to, work with each other in the fight against corruption? Let's take that short break. We'll be back.